In this video, we're going to take a crash course in getting started with RStudio. Much of this video will be a live demo in RStudio, but there are slides online with the details. Now, the first step to getting started with RStudio is to install the software. Now, this is a two-step process. First, you need to download and install R, which is the engine behind RStudio. Second, and in that order, you then download and install RStudio. Now, if you have a laptop that you plan to bring to class, you're strongly encouraged to install R in RStudio on this laptop. It's free software. Alternatively, if you don't plan to bring your laptop to class or don't plan to ever use RStudio again, then you might consider using Mac's RStudio server at this address. Once you've installed RStudio and R, open up RStudio. When you do, you'll see 4 panes that look like this. These 4 different panes have very different functionalities, and we're just going to focus on some of the basics today. But before we get started, we're going to install 5 packages that we'll be using throughout the semester: ggplot2, dplyr, broom, infer, and janitor. Now I'll show you one way of installing these packages. So inside RStudio, in the lower right-hand pane, I click on the Packages tab. Within there, click on the Install button. In the text box, I write the name of the package that I want to install. Notice that it pops up. I want to make sure this box, Install Dependencies, is clicked. That means when I install this package, I'm going to install all other packages upon which it depends. Once I have these 2 pieces of information in place, I can then click the Install button. Since I already have ggplot2 installed, I'm going to cancel. So again, on the slides, you'll see this 4-step process. Once you have RStudio open and some necessary packages installed, then you can start a new R Markdown file, or a .rmd file. To do that, I go to File, New File, R Markdown. I just click OK at this step. You get a file with a bunch of information in it, and I just get rid of all of that. So notice that this is a file that I can type in, just like a Word doc or a Google Doc. And we'll see different pieces that I can put into an R Markdown file, starting with a title. So the pound sign here indicates that this is a header or a title. I can include regular text, and I can install or insert R chunks or code chunks. To do this, I can go to this green button, Insert, and choose R. Notice what I get is a gray box now, 3 backticks, and an R in curly braces, and then it closes the gray box with 3 backticks. Now in between is where I type my R code. So at its basic level, I can use R in RStudio as a calculator. So for example, I might calculate 2 plus 4. On the next line, I might calculate 2 times 4 plus 3. Now I don't see anything here, this is just code. If I want to process this code and see the output, I can click the green Run button, or this green arrow. So now I see the results. 2 plus 4 is 6, and 2 times 4 plus 3 is 11. Now the document itself right now looks like code and syntax. So if I want to turn this raw document into a final document, I can knit it together using this knit button, or this yarn ball up here. So when I click knit, it's going to ask me to save my file. I'm just going to save it under scrap. And when I click the knit button, it turns this raw document over here into this processed document here. So now that we have some basics, let's look at some other functionality of R. Mainly, let's play around with some functions. So in R, we can do more than just use it as a calculator. There are built-in functions. these functions have names. So for example, there's a function named sum. R is case sensitive, and so it's important to use the correct cases and spellings. This function has a name. It opens and closes with parentheses, and inside the parentheses I put arguments. And I separate these arguments with a comma. So you might anticipate what the sum function does. It's going to sum the values or arguments that I give it. So I can calculate the sum of 1 and 7. I can include another argument, 2, and I get a sum equal to 10. Consider another function, just for extra practice, one named rep. Inside the rep function, I can specify 2 arguments. In this case, these arguments have labels, x and times. So this argument x, I'm going to write 2, and times, I'm going to say is equal to 3. So you might anticipate what the rep function is going to do. We can see if your intuition is right. We can run the chunk, and we see that rep of x equals 2 times equals 3 repeats the number 2 3 times. So notice then that the order of these arguments is important. If I change x equals to 3 and times equal to 2, then I'm going to repeat the number 3 2 times. So functions have names that are case sensitive. They open and close with parentheses. They take arguments that have names often, and I separate these arguments with a comma. So now let's do some sampling. To begin, I'm going to specify what I'm going to do in this chunk. So it's a good idea to annotate your code or to take notes to indicate what each chunk is doing. So right now, I'm just going to say that this is a comment. R ignores, in an R chunk, anything after a pound sign. So when I run this, I don't get an error. If I got rid of it, it would be confused. So I put a pound sign. And I'm going to say that in this chunk, what I'm trying to do is to set up a dice. So if we think about a 6-sided dice, I can store the dice in what's called a data frame. And I'll say that the dice can take numbers from 1 to 6. So if I run this, I see a data frame, which looks like a matrix, with one column. I named that column number, and in that column, I put the numbers 1 to 6. Now, once I start using this dice, I don't want to have to write out this piece of information every time, so instead I'm going to store this information in an object named dice. So notice I've chosen the name dice, and I've used this assignment operator, which essentially just takes the information that I have a data frame, and I'm going to put it inside an object named dice. So now when I run this chunk, I don't see anything because my information is stored in an object. If I want to see the information in that object, I can just type the name of that object, here dice, and I'll see the information. So now that we have a dice set up, we can do some samples, or we can roll the dice. So we're going to start by sampling the dice without replacement. This means that every time I roll the dice, if I observe the number 1 on my first roll, then I can't observe it again. To do this sampling, there's a function named sample_n. However, the sample_n function doesn't come loaded inside RStudio automatically. Instead, it's included in a special package named dplyr. So packages have their own functionality that they contribute to the R community. If I want to use a function within that package, I have to make sure that it's loaded within my R Markdown document. Once it's loaded, I can use the sample_n function, and the sample_n function needs 3 pieces of information. First, it needs to know what am I sampling from. I'm sampling from my dice object. It needs to know how many times am I going to sample that object. So say I want to sample it 3 times. And it needs to know if I want to sample with or without replacement. And here I want to sample without replacement or replace equals false. So let's see what happens when we run this code. Notice I get 3 numbers from 1 to 6, 2, 6, and 5. Since sampling is a random process, if I run this chunk again, I get 3 different numbers, 6, 4, 5. And every time I run the chunk, I might get something different, but I always get 3 numbers. And notice that these 3 numbers are never the same. This is because I sampled without replacement, meaning that if I saw a 1 the first time I rolled, then I can't see it again. Logically, if I can sample without replacement, I can also sample with replacement. To do so, I'm just going to copy and paste this code and change replace equals false to replace equals true. Now notice when I roll my dice, I get 5, 1, 2 the first time, and the second time I get some repeats. So I saw 4, 6, and then 4 again. I can see 4 again because I sampled with replacement. So finally, I have a bunch of information in my R Markdown file. I have a title, I have some text, I have a bunch of R chunks that demonstrate how functions work, how I open and close them with parentheses, how they take different named arguments that are separated by commas, and we learned how to store an object under a label and how we can sample from objects without and with replacement. So now that I'm done with this document, I'm going to knit it one final time, and I have my results.